Hi, welcome to my sewing room. I'm Emily from Homemade Emily Jane. Today I'm going to teach you how I get perfect 1/4 inch seams for patchwork and quilting. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and also check out homemadeemilyjane.com, where you'll find articles like this written out for you to reference later. All right, let's dive into perfect piecing for patchwork. For me, the first step in getting perfect pieces is to start off with accurate cutting. There's really no way around it. If you start off with wonky pieces, you'll end up with wonky pieces too. So for me, perfect cutting means using my AccuQuilt fabric cutting machine, which uses dies to make sure that things are accurate every time. If you don't have a fabric cutting machine, be sure to use a rotary cutter and a ruler and just make sure that you're very careful to get it precise. If you want to learn more about AccuQuilt, I have tons of resources about it on my blog and also on my YouTube channel. Be sure to check those out. The next thing to keep in mind when looking for perfect piecing with your 1/4 inch is to make sure that you're using a 1/4 inch foot. The one I'm using today has a little line where the 1/4 inch mark is, but some other feet might also have a guide that will help actually push the fabric where you want it to be. I've also seen a couple options for little stickers that go on your machine to hold your fabric in place that actually has a little bit of height to it that your fabric bumps up against. I've heard really great things about that. I personally haven't used it. Another thing that I use to keep my 1/4 inch in line is a piece of tape actually that has the lines marked on it for a 1/4 inch. This is a product sold by Cluck Cluck Sew, and it has been so wonderful for making sure that I get everything lined up a long way before it actually gets to the needle. And the next thing you want to do, now that you have your 1/4 inch foot on your machine, go ahead and grab a ruler and physically measure the distance between the edge of your guide and the needle. So in order to do that, I'll go ahead and get it nice and close, and then go ahead and just slowly, ever so slowly, put your needle down until it hits the ruler. You definitely don't want to damage your needle, so you're not trying to go through the ruler, just look at where it hits and see if it hits at the 1/4 inch line. You actually want it to be just a smidge to the right of the 1/4 inch line to make it a scant 1/4 inch to make up for when the fabric folds over the thread later on. So I look at mine and it is just a smidge to the right of the line, but when you look at yours, see if you might need to adjust the needle position. So a lot of machines have the option to move your needle to the left or to the right so that you can get it perfectly in line. You'll also want to be careful what foot you're using and also what plate you have on if your machine has options, because that will make a difference as to how much or how far you can move your needle. So keep that in mind as you're finagling with it to get that perfect 1/4 inch seam. Once you've measured it and you've adjusted your needle if you need to, now we're going to actually test it out. So go ahead and grab 2 pieces of fabric. It can be any fabric. I cut mine into just 2.5 inch squares, but you can cut yours however you want. I'm just gonna use these scraps to sew together. So now we'll go ahead and line our fabric up on the edge and then simply stitch a 1/4 inch seam. We're just gonna test it and see how it works. Once you've stitched, you can go ahead and cut your thread and open it up and take a look. There's a couple different ways to see if it actually worked. One of them is simply line up your ruler with the seam and see if it comes to the 1/4 inch mark. Mine actually looks a little bit too scant here. So what you can also do is press it how you would press it. I typically press open unless I'm able to nest the seams, but typically I'll press open. So here I'll just do an easy finger press, and the space on the inside should be roughly a 1/4 inch on each side. So for the most part, mine does look pretty accurate, but the real test is to see if the piece that I sewed 2.5 inch squares together should now be 4.5 inches long. So I would take that to my cutting mat and put the ruler on top of it and see if it is smaller than 4.5 inches, that means my seam was too big. And if it is larger than 4.5 inches, which is the case on this example, my seam was a little bit too scant. So now you know how to best adjust your fabric to make up for the way that you've been sewing. Once you've tested it out and you've determined how to best use your machine and your settings to make that perfect 1/4 inch, the final thing to do is practice. I know it sounds a little tedious, but practice really does make perfect, and I've been sewing for years and years and I still have to practice this one. So just keep at it and keep going, because surely you will get there, and the more you do it, the more familiar you will be with how the scant 1/4 inch seam should look, and your pieces will be more and more precise as you go along. I hope you found this little tutorial helpful. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Homemade Emily Jane, and also check out my website, homemadeemilyjane.com, for lots more quilting tips and tricks and techniques. I'm always here to help, so feel free to reach out with any questions.